Do you remember the first time a song stopped you cold, and you had no idea why? These songs did that. They played on every radio, in every car, in every summer that felt like it would never end. Then the world moved on, and somehow, these ones slipped away. Behind these melodies are the things nobody told you. A saxophone worth millions, paid with 27 pounds. A band destroyed by the very obsession they sang about. A man who wrote a song about escaping, and never escaped. Today we are counting down 10 forgotten rock songs that should never have been forgotten. Let's begin. Number 10. Somebody's Baby. Jackson Browne. 1982.
She must be somebody's baby.
Jackson Browne did not want to record this song. He thought it was too simple, too cheerful, too far from the serious work that had defined his career. His therapist was the one who finally talked him into it, saying, "Everybody wants to belong to somebody. That is not a pop lyric. That is the most honest thing a human being can feel." Written alongside Danny Korchmar for the Fast Times at Ridgemont High soundtrack, the song was deliberately bright. Layered vocals building the feeling of a California summer crowd. No complicated solos, no deep metaphors, just the quiet ache of wanting someone you cannot reach. Browne later called it an unabashed pop song, and he meant it as mild self-deprecation. He did not include it on any studio album. He did not think it was important enough. He was wrong. Somebody's Baby reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became the highest charting single of his entire career. The song he almost refused to finish outlasted everything he wrote with full conviction. Browne gave the world something reluctantly, and the world held on to it for decades. The simplest songs sometimes carry the heaviest truth. Wanting to belong is not weakness. It is the one thing nobody outgrows. That song hid its depth behind sunshine and California guitars. The next one hides nothing. A bass line like clenched fists, a voice that never asked for sympathy, and a story written before the band had even released their first album. Number 9. Wrathchild. Iron Maiden. 1981. A boy who has never met his father, who spends his days looking for a man that is nowhere to be found. Steve Harris wrote that story as one of the very first Iron Maiden songs ever conceived. Before the band had released a single album, before the stadiums, before the legacy. He did not write it as fiction. He wrote it because some wounds need somewhere to go. The song is under 3 minutes, no elaborate solos, no theatrical detours. Harris made that choice deliberately. A bass line that moves like someone walking forward with clenched fists. And Paul Di'Anno's voice, unpolished, street level, singing about abandonment without asking for sympathy. Producer Martin Birch kept the sound rough on purpose, because a song about being left behind should not be comfortable to listen to. Here is what most people do not know. Wrathchild first appeared on a 1980 compilation called Metal for Muthas, before Iron Maiden had even released their debut album. By the time Killers came out in 1981, the song had already been living in the world for a year. It was not the centerpiece of the album, not the single. It sat quietly in the track list, furious and patient at the same time. Decades later, guitarist Adrian Smith called it perhaps his favorite song in the band's entire catalog. Not the epics, not the anthems that filled arenas. This one. 2 minutes and 40 seconds of a young man's unresolved anger, still unresolved, still running. The heaviest songs are not always the loudest. Sometimes the heaviest thing a songwriter can do is write the truth about where they came from, and let it run without apology. where Wrathchild was built from a wound that never healed. The next one was built from a summer that never existed. A band that was not outstandingly cheery, in their own words, somehow wrote the most joyful 3 minutes of the entire decade, and nobody saw it coming. Number 8. Obsession, Animotion, 1984. Be honest, how many times have you heard this song without knowing that the band who recorded it was eventually destroyed by the very thing the song describes? Neither Michael Desbars nor Holly Knight belonged to Animotion. They were outsiders handed a brief. Write something about obsession. Knight had already written Love is a Battlefield for Pat Benatar. Desbars had lived enough to know exactly how a mind that cannot stop circling feels from the inside. What they delivered was not a love song. It was a warning dressed as a dance track.
Like a butterfly, a wild butterfly.
The production made the point without saying a word. The synthesizer loop was programmed to never resolve. No release, no clean exit. Just the same phrase. Returning, returning, returning. Male and female voices trading lines as if two people were arguing inside one skull. MTV played it constantly through 1985. The song peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed in the top 40 for 14 weeks. Then the story turned. Animotion spent the years after their hit trying to chase it. Internal pressure, label demands, the impossible task of recreating something they had not even written themselves. The band that recorded a song about being unable to let go could not let go of the one moment that defined them. Holly Knight moved on and wrote Simply the Best for Tina Turner. Animotion quietly fell apart. The song outlived everything. A top 6 Billboard hit. A band that vanished. And a songwriter who walked away richer in every sense of the word. That distance between the writer and the performer is exactly what this countdown is about. The next song closes that distance completely. One artist, one wound, one guitar riff that made a generation feel seen, and a music video so provocative that MTV refused to air it before midnight. Number 7. Shadows of the Night, Pat Benatar, 1982. Most people remember Hit Me with Your Best Shot. Some remember Love is a Battlefield. But ask Pat Benatar which song from that era she is most proud of, and the answer might surprise you. Shadows of the Night was written by D.L. Byron, not Benatar. She and guitarist Neil Giraldo took the original, stripped it down, rebuilt the tempo from scratch, and turned it into something that sounded like a wartime march disguised as a rock song. The music video did not have a dance routine or a smoke machine. It had Benatar in a World War II flight suit, surrounded by real military imagery, playing the role of a female pilot. In 1982, that was not a music video. That was a short film. MTV ran it constantly. And yet somehow, the song peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was quietly forgotten behind the louder, simpler hits that followed. Critics at the time praised Benatar's vocal control on this track above almost everything else she recorded. The belting was not decoration. It was precision. Here is the part that stays with you. D.L. Byron, the man who wrote the song, never had another hit. His name appears in the credits of one of the most underrated rock performances of the decade, and almost nobody knows it. Some songs deserve a bigger room than they were ever given. This is one of them. Benatar built a short film around it, put everything she had into the vocal, and the world moved on to the next single. The next artist on this list had the opposite problem. The world did not move on. It held on so tightly that the man at the center of it spent the rest of his life trying to escape the song that made him.
Baby, take my hand, it'll be alright.
Number 6. The Search is Over. Survivor. 1985.
The search is over. You will win.
Everyone knows Eye of the Tiger. The Fists in the Air anthem, the Rocky theme, the song that made Survivor famous overnight. But ask Jim Paterick which song he actually meant, and he will not name that one. The Search is Over was written about his wife, Karen. Not a new romance. Not the dizzy first weeks of falling in love. This was Paterick looking across the room at someone who had been there for years, and realizing, slowly, that the person he had been searching for his entire life was already standing next to him. He wrote it while Eye of the Tiger's shadow was still covering everything. The pressure to repeat that success was enormous, so instead of chasing the arena anthem, he went in the opposite direction. He wrote the most private thing he could.
Miracle of fate.
The production reflects that choice. Less reverb than usual, closer mic placement on the vocals. The result is a voice that sounds like it is talking to one person, not filling a stadium. Paterick and Frankie Sullivan produced it themselves, and that intimacy was not accidental. It reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the summer of 1985. It appeared in the Sylvester Stallone film Cobra. It was, by any measure, a significant hit. And yet today, if you mention Survivor to almost anyone, they will start humming Eye of the Tiger within 3 seconds.
I was living for a dream.
That is what this countdown is really about. Not songs that failed, songs that succeeded and were still somehow left behind. Paterick wrote the most honest love song of his career, placed it next to the biggest sports anthem of the decade, and watched the world choose the louder one every single time. The next artist never had that problem. Nobody forgot their song. They forgot the story behind it. And that story begins not in a recording studio, but on a clifftop in the south of England, on a night that changed everything.
I can see forever.
Number 5. Radar Love. Golden Earring, 1973.
Voice in my head that drives my heel.
Radio programmers in America refused to play this. Nearly 7 minutes long, from a Dutch band nobody had heard of, opening with a drum intro that runs almost a full minute before anything else happens. Too long, too strange. The listeners disagreed loudly enough that stations eventually had no choice. Barry Hay wrote the lyrics late at night, driving alone, feeling something he could not explain. Not homesickness, more like a signal. The sense that somewhere out there, the person he loved was thinking of him at that exact moment. He called it radar love, not as poetry, as a description of something that actually happened.
When she is lonely and the longing gets too much.
No famous producer, no major American label. Kooymans played the riff raw, minimal overdubs, no polish. It sounds like someone actually driving. Windows down, engine loud. 3 in the morning and nowhere near home. It reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1974. Then a live version charted again in 1977. The same song, 2 separate runs. Years apart. That almost never happens. And somewhere in this countdown, the most recognized instrumental riff in pop history was recorded for less than £30. The man who played it never saw a single penny in royalties. That story is still coming. Golden Earring stayed together for over 60 years. Kooymans was diagnosed with ALS in 2021. The band dissolved quietly the following year. No farewell tour, just over. The way real things end. The next song was also built on a riff that refuses to leave. But where this one was born on an open highway, that one came from a room with the curtains drawn, by a man who did not want to be found. Number 4. Burning Down the House, Talking Heads, 1983. Be honest. Have you ever tried to explain what this song means and failed completely? You are not alone. David Byrne cannot explain it either. He heard a single phrase shouted from the stage at a Parliament Funkadelic concert. Burn down the house, 4 words. He wrote an entire song around the energy of that moment, not the meaning. When journalists later asked what it was about, he said he genuinely did not know. That answer was not modesty. It was the truth. Tina Weymouth's bass runs the song. Not the guitar, not the vocals. The bass is the architecture, and everything else lives inside it. Byrne recorded his vocal in multiple takes, choosing the one that sounded most unhinged, not most polished. The percussion was built from West African rhythms blended with a drum machine, which is why it sits in no particular decade and belongs to all of them. It reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. The concert film Stop Making Sense the following year turned it into something larger than a hit. It became a moment. 4 decades later, academics are still writing papers about what the song means. Byrne still has no answer. A song built from 4 shouted words, by a band that chose the strangest take, has outlasted almost everything that made sense in 1983. The next song made perfect sense from the very first note. A love story. A clifftop. A night that Robert Smith described as the happiest of his life, at one of the most somber places in all of England. Number 3. Just Like Heaven, The Cure, 1987. Robert Smith wrote the happiest song of his career at one of the most somber places in England, Beachy Head, a clifftop on the south coast where the sea stretches out below you and the wind comes in hard off the water. He was there with Mary, the woman he would marry a year later. He described that night as the happiest he had ever felt. The song, he said, is about hyperventilating, kissing and fainting to the floor. That is not a metaphor. That is what actually happened. The band recorded most of Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me in southern France. Smith forced himself to write 15 days every month, no exceptions. Just Like Heaven came out of that discipline, not inspiration. He knew immediately it was the best pop song The Cure had ever made. He said so out loud to his bandmates, which for Robert Smith was practically a standing ovation. The song reached number 29 in the UK and number 40 on the Billboard Hot 100. Modest numbers for something this enduring. Dinosaur Jr. covered it 2 years later, and a generation that had never heard The Cure suddenly needed to find the original. Robert Smith and Mary are still together, more than 40 years. In a genre built on heartbreak and dissolution, that is quietly extraordinary. He wrote her the most joyful song he had in him, at a place most people go to feel the opposite. She appears in the music video, dressed in white, dancing on the clifftop where it all began. Some love stories do not need a tragedy to be worth telling, and somewhere in this countdown, a session musician walked into a studio, played one phrase on a saxophone, and was handed less than 30 pounds for his trouble. That phrase became the most recognized instrumental riff in pop history. He never received a single penny more. That story is one song away.
Show me how you do that trick.
Number 2. Walking on Sunshine, Katrina and the Waves, 1985. Here is what Kimberly Rue actually said about writing this song. Quote, "We were not outstandingly cheery people. They were a second on the bill at a festival in Germany band. No major label, no fan base, no credibility. Just a guitarist who sat down and wrote the most relentlessly joyful 3 minutes of the entire decade, while feeling none of it. That distance between what the song promises and what the songwriter was living is the whole story.
Walking on sunshine. Whoa.
The song was first recorded in 1983 and released only in Canada on an independent label to almost no response. 2 years later, re-recorded with Capitol Records behind it. The tempo pushed slightly faster than the original, the brass section locked in tighter. That small adjustment is the difference between a good song and one that makes strangers dance in supermarkets. It reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 8 in the UK. Advertisers eventually paid between $150,000 and $200,000 per year just to borrow its 30 seconds. The song has appeared in over 1,000 films, commercials, and television shows. Rue wrote it in an afternoon. He called it just a piece of simple fun.
Does it feel good? Hey, alright.
In 1997, Katrina performed it solo at Eurovision, representing the United Kingdom. They won. A song recorded in obscurity, released twice, ignored once, conquered Europe the second time around. Kimberly Rue collected royalties for 40 years from a song he wrote when nobody was watching and nothing was working. That is not a feel-good ending. That is something rarer. Proof that the right 3 minutes, written on the wrong day, can outlast almost everything. One song remains, and the story behind it is the reason this countdown exists. Number 1. Baker Street, Jerry Rafferty, 1978. That saxophone. You knew it in the first 2 notes. What almost nobody knows is that the man who played it was paid £27.50. Standard union rate. No royalties, no negotiation. He walked in, filled a gap, and walked out. The riff earned millions. Raphael Ravenscroft received nothing more. He said years later it irritated him every time he heard it, because it was slightly out of tune. The most recognized saxophone riff in pop history. Slightly out of tune. Paid less than a dinner costs today.
But you're trying.
Rafferty wrote this while trapped in a legal dispute that kept him from recording for 3 years. He stayed in a friend's flat on Baker Street, walking those streets at dawn, watching people who came to London with something in mind, and stayed longer than they planned. The song reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 6 consecutive weeks. City to City went to number 1. The arrival he had been waiting for finally came, and it broke him. He refused the interviews, refused the tours, retreated slowly, then completely. The man who wrote a song about escaping the city spent the rest of his life trying to escape the song. He died in January 2011, alone, 63 years old. Ravenscroft died 3 years later. Neither lived to understand what they had made together. Some songs outlive the people who made them. Baker Street outlives the version of Rafferty who still believed leaving was possible.
But you know you'll always keep moving.
A band that recorded a warning about obsession and could not escape it. A guitarist paid £27 for the most recognized riff in pop history. A man who wrote a song about leaving and never left. These songs were not forgotten because they were small. They were forgotten because the world moves fast and does not always look back. But you did. Tonight, you looked back. If these stories stayed with you, the best thing you can do is keep this machine running. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell us which song hit hardest. And if you think one story on this list deserved more time, we are listening. Some stories make tonight look simple. We will see you there.